Good evening. Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry that we have made you wait a little while there. I'm Nick Buenfeld. I'm Head of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at Imperial, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to my department and to this, the 41st Annual Paviors Lecture. We don't have a fire test planned for this evening, so if you do hear an intermittent alarm, please leave by one of those two doors back to the entrance of the building, out of the building and turn right, and you need to wait at the base of the Queen's Tower. You can't miss it when you're round there. The organisation of this annual lecture is a joint effort between the Paviors Imperial College and the Institution of Civil Engineers. And I know that we have a good mix here of paviors, students, and people generally from industry, probably more from that latter group than we're used to for this lecture. This is definitely the largest turnout that we've had. The number of registrations for this lecture exceeded the number of seats in this room a few weeks ago, and so we've set up an overflow room upstairs, room 207, on the second floor of this building, and the lecture is being beamed to the people up there. It's going via satellite rather than via hard wire, and I'm told that means that there's a 20 to 30 second delay. So if you hear hysterical laughter that seems to be out of sync with what's going on in here, you'll have some idea of what's happened. The talk is being filmed, both by the system, the inbuilt system, and also by Paviors' video man here. So please turn off mobile phones. It's my privilege to get the evening underway by introducing the master of the worshipful company of Paviors, Terry Last, who I think will tell us a little more about the Paviors and will then introduce our speaker for the evening. So a little about Terry. He's a quarrying guru. He studied quarrying engineering and then has worked in or close to that important area for over 40 years. Of course, quarrying and producing aggregates is very important for concrete and for roads, and therefore is absolutely central to any significant construction project. And Terry has worked for Wimpy Asphalt, including 3 years in the West Indies, ARC with a spell in Nigeria, Hanson, Aggregate Industries, and from 2001 for Tarmac, rising to be Chief Executive of Tarmac UK. He's been Chairman and President of the Institution of Quarrying, and along the way he's picked up an honorary doctorate in business administration. He's also a governor of 2 schools, and most impressive for me when I'm reading up about him was that for his 60th birthday he walked to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. I have to say that I'm 60 this year and was intending to go to the pub with a few mates. But I'm rethinking those plans now. Terry, over to you.
I'll hold it, but I'll probably just shout. The pub sounds a whole lot better idea in retrospect, but nevertheless pleased to have done what I did to celebrate 60, and it was for a good charitable cause, I hasten to add. Good evening, everybody. It's really a great pleasure to be here tonight, and Nick, thank you for that warm welcome. Nick has just bounced me by saying I'd say something about the Paviors. Not something I'd intended to do, but I'm delighted to do so. We're born out of a number of guilds that sort of ran a lot of professions way back in almost the Dark Ages. Our records date back to 1280. I often describe the Paviors as the most important guild of all because it was our job to keep the streets clean, in tidy and in good repair. And without us, before the days of mobile phone or internet or anything else, nobody else would have been able to go about their business without decent streets and infrastructure to get along with. Isn't that a great lead into our lecture later on? We are one of about 110 now worshipful companies, all based around the City of London, and are very proud to be a thriving company and absolutely delighted that we can do things like this in our normal program. We're delighted to see so many of you here, particularly students, and absolutely delighted, as Nick has said, that there's been such a demand that we've had to stream it upstairs as well. I don't intend to go on too much because I think I get a chance to say a little bit more a little later on, but what I'm going to do is, without further ado, simply to introduce my 2016 year Paviors Lecturer. It is our upper warden. He will be master and wear this gong in 2 years' time, Miles Ashley. Miles began his career setting out the centre line of the M25 motorway in Leatherhead whilst working for Balfour Beatty. He graduated in civil engineering at Kingston and worked for Lovell Construction across a wide range of projects, eventually managing the company's business with London Underground and Railtrack. In the year 2000, he was appointed MD of Heritage Property Group and joined the board of project manager Clarkson Goff Limited. Today, Miles is Programme Director Construction for London Underground and very much enjoys grappling with complex urban projects, including the Northern Line extension and the stations at Tottenham Court Road, Bond Street, Victoria and Bank. Miles is a fellow of not only the Institution of Civil Engineers, but also of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and the Royal Society of Arts. Miles is a member of the Treasury Infrastructure UK Client Group and has led work on alternative delivery models and risk. He was also part of the team that developed the Treasury's infrastructure procurement route map. This lecture is to be titled, Can London Survive? The city's dependence on its metro. And Miles, please come up to the stage to deliver your lecture.
Just handled the AV equipment. Never seen so much of it. Well, can I start off by saying, what a real honour it is to give this the 41st Paviors Lecture. I think after 41 years we can finally say it's really beginning to catch on. And it's all the sweeter really to come back here as an invite, as a lecturer, because I'm absolutely certain that when I was a student they wouldn't have let me through the front door. Brilliant also that there are so many people, and hello to you in the gods, that there are so many people here tonight, which probably indicates that there's a rather obsessive interest in the student community here in London Underground. Alternatively, I think probably this is one of the few lectures that you have where there's a reception afterwards involving free alcohol. So I know I'm not really a lecturer, I'm more a sort of canapé. Anyway, while we're waiting for the drinks to arrive, I wanted to tell you a bit of a story. This is rather presumptuously entitled, Can London Survive? More accurately, it's really a story about how London has survived, how it currently survives, and before we can add any conjecture about whether it will survive in the future. And I wonder what you thought about London Underground, what you would think if you tootled off down to South Kensington, intent on a journey to Cricklewood or Rodding Valley or Thaden Boys, only to find the gates locked. How would you survive and how would London survive? So I thought I'd turn to Google to see what people might think. And there's a little bit of a trick with Google because actually you can put in the name of an organisation and then, hang on, AV equipment. First slide, hang on. There we go. I can see it on this screen anyway. It's brilliant. All this equipment, and I'm not going anywhere. So I'm glad you came along. There we go. So there's a little trick you can play with Google. If you put in the name of an organisation followed by is, you can get a sense of what questions people are asking about these organisations. Now, this is the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is your enemy. The Conservative Party is dying. I think if I was getting that sort of tax break, I'd expect a bit better publicity, wouldn't you? Better news. It'd give it a little bit of political balance. The Labour Party is finished. The Labour Party is now threatened. The Labour Party is dead. Not very Corbynista. They're also extremely unfair to the NHS. But if you put in London Underground is, what you get is London Underground is massive. And if that's what you truly think, then you'd be right. Because London Underground is a system of 11 lines, 583 trains, 420 escalators, 249 miles of track and 270 stations. And to me, it's incredible, really, that that system has been built in about 3 times my lifetime, because I don't feel that old. And I am privileged to run the construction team in London Underground. We're the current constructors of London Underground. And I can tell you that none of us come to work in the morning knowing anything other than we stand on the shoulders of the giants that have created this. And we have 2 favourite pictures. One of them I'll show you at the end, but this is the other one. And this is a picture of London. And to us, this is the most tolerant, productive, beautiful city on earth. And you can't really work for an organisation like London Underground, but that this gets under your fingernails and into your heart. It is the place where people from throughout the world want to live, want to work, and want to play. And it's this mix of characteristics that give London this incredible value. 350 billion of the country's GDP, 26% of the country's GDP out of 15% of the population. And you can almost imagine, can't you, Vespasian in 43 BC, fording the Thames by St Thomas's Hospital, which in fact he did, standing on the northern bank and saying something like, "Build it, and they will come," which in fact he didn't, because that was Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams. But if he had, he'd have been right. And I think this picture speaks a lot to what we do. So in the top left-hand corner of that picture, you have banks, the coincidence of these 4 lines, which allow people to come to work in this very dense area of the city. And on the right-hand side, you have the Jubilee Line extension, which has helped to regenerate the South Bank. And there you have the Shard, Irving Seller making his point, as it were. And then in the far distance, Canary Wharf. And the Jubilee Line extension, without which Canary Wharf, of course, would not have existed, had a business case when the decision was made of 0.96. So we weren't even going to get our money back. And on that business case hung the decision to extend the Jubilee Line and to allow Canary Wharf to exist. And can you imagine a London without Canary Wharf? The numbers are really incredible. So London Underground transports 1.3 billion people a year. As Bill Bryson recently said, actually at any one time, there will be over 600,000 people travelling on London Underground, which makes it a more populated and far more interesting place than Oslo. But when you start to translate these numbers down to the individual stations, if you look at Victoria, there's 83 million people go in and out of Victoria a year. That's about 10 million more people a year than the whole of Heathrow Airport. And they say they need another runway. I think they just need to get a grip. No, they do need another runway. And when you go to these other stations, you know, if you look at Tottenham Court Road and Bank and Bond Street, you know, they're equally populated, 53 million people going in and out of Bank. And, you know, even a place like Green Park, at 27 million people, has more people in and out of it than all but one of the terminals at Heathrow. So there's a really incredible pressure on this system. If that was all we had to deal with, just a big number, I'd be answering the question now. London can survive, and we cope with it. The real issue is, though, the growth that's involved. So you can take places like Bond Street, And in a 7-year period, you can see at these stations something like 47% growth, Green Park 44% growth. And as this graph shows, back in 2009, when we were about at 1 billion passengers, we predicted that in the next 20 years, there'd be a 20% increase. Actually, just 4 years later, we were at 1.2 billion, and today we're at 1.3 billion. So this level of growth is absolutely extraordinary. And funnily enough, if you track this back as a straight line to 1863, when we were created, the fundamental message is that the number of passengers doubles every 35 years. If you look at that in a wider context, we've got about 8.7 billion trips across the whole of transport for London at the moment. And as we move to a population of 10 million in 2030, that will increase to 11 billion. So London Underground is really only part of this overall picture. So when I'm talking to you about London Underground, you've got to see it in that context. And that 10 billion, just so that you get an illustration of what that means, by 2030 is like taking a city the size of Birmingham and chucking it into the middle of that picture. And if you try then to understand what that might mean to us in terms of pressure, of course we come from a London Underground perspective, so that's equivalent to 2 tube trains every week. So it's not the overall numbers that is really the challenge here. The challenge is the growth and how we keep up with that growth. If you start to then take those growth figures and look at how that might affect the station environments that we have to deal with, this is the picture. And this is the picture based on the amount of investment that we're currently planning to make. And what this says is that 80% of those Zone 1 stations will be at Fruin Level C by 2031. Fruin Level C is more than 4.5 people a metre squared. Now, I don't know whether you've ever stood in a telephone box with 3.5 of your friends, and it's probably a pleasure you'd have to pay for, I would think. But ultimately, that sort of gives you an illustration of just how crowded parts of these stations are going to be, and the challenge that faces us. It renders it inoperable. And you may think that it's about getting passengers into these stations, but actually sometimes it's more important to get people out. So Bond Street is a good example of where we've invested a lot of money in a faster Jubilee line, moving to 33 and eventually 36 trains per hour. Of course, if you can't get those people off the platform and out to enable the next train to arrive, then of course you have to run to non-stopping. And instead of buying jewellery in Bond Street, they're whisked off to Swiss Cottage, where all you can buy presumably is a cuckoo clock. This ability to empty the station to allow these platforms to be used is fundamental. And actually what the modelling will tell you around Bank is that when you get that non-stopping at Bank, you start to put pressure on London Bridge, and we've all seen that, and Moorgate. And actually, at some time during something around 2018, 2019, if you take no operational measures, then you get essentially a progressive breakdown of the network in that peak morning flow. It just crashes across the network. So that growth is an incredibly serious problem for us. And this is the sort of experience, of course, that most of you at one time or another have faced. This is the commute that our customers have to face every morning on the Northern Line at Bank. And increasingly, the amount of time that people are spending in stations is increasing as we prosecute the line upgrades. And right now, they're spending 53% of their time within the station environment in environments like this. Reliability, of course, if we go back, is the other challenge for us. We're operating, in many respects, a Victorian railway, which we're trying to upgrade. And if you go back to 2010 and 2011, as we approached the Olympics, reliability was a major issue for us. It is incredibly useful to be able to go to the tube station every night on your way home pick up an Evening Standard and get a sometimes personalised personal development plan. Because if you stop one train on this system, the gatekeeper is the Standard, and it will spot it. And having personally stopped Victoria from running because I poured 6 metres of concrete into a brand new signal room, I can tell you that is a very unpleasant experience. The mayor has a performance screen in his office. It is, at a very high political level, watched very closely and set as a target in 2011 of improving the reliability on the tube by 30% before 2015. Now, I'm pleased to say that at the end of 2015 we've improved the performance by 38%. And actually you don't see as much of this as you used to do, this negative criticism, and you see our customer performance figures rising and people's attitude towards the London Underground, I think, significantly improving in the time that I've been there. Not that it's the same with me. The other challenge, of course, that we face today is our funding. An operating budget of 6.6 billion. About 700 million of that a year comes from a grant. And just before Christmas, early Christmas present, we were comprehensively spending reviewed, and that grant essentially will disappear. So we will be facing a cost pressure of £700 million a year. Now, you can't turn an operational business on its head, within those sort of timescales. And of course, what that means is, in effect, that it has the potential to have a very significant effect on our capital programme. And added to that, of course, we've got two leading mayors at the moment coming in with their own agendas around freezing fares and shaping their attitude about how they might run London Underground. So that's a further threat on the horizon. And as I wander around the office, occasionally I meet somebody like this who works for me with their nose buried into their keyboard, blubbing uncontrollably. And I pat them on the back and say that great jobs only have good days and bad days and nothing in between. And that no increase in their salary in the public sector would compensate for the loss of this vocation. And they look at me mournfully but reflectively and carry on. And I wonder whether we all think that this is something that is a modern malaise. It's the thing that we have to deal with today. Let me take you back to 1850. And this is a picture of London in the 1850s. This two-dimensional, you can still see the Wren churches. They were trying to follow Vespasian's instructions, and we'd got somewhere. But the population of this city was growing exponentially. In fact, actually, if I take it over the longer period, and I take from about 1850 to 1901, the population of London doubled within that half a century, doubled from just over 3 million to over 6 million. So there was enormous pressure. And this is a picture of the time up on Ludgate Hill. And you'll notice in the top right-hand corner there, there's an advert for the Standard. So even then, they were around just checking up on us. We didn't even started that. So, this is typical. And accounts at the time will talk of this, this appalling trial of kind of getting into central London, and how the city was being choked. Several ridiculous ideas were formed as to how this could be delivered, how we could get people from the outlying terminus stations into the centre of London. And this is the Great Girdle, an idea by Paxton. I suspect it could really upset your afternoon tea to have that thundering past your living room window. But in fact, it anticipated the route of the Circle Line eventually, but didn't fly. This is a more amazing idea. This is a transporting people in a vacuum tube. I couldn't find any reference to how you were going to breathe. But anyway, and I suspect it could form havoc with your top hat. And into the middle of this came this lunatic. Charles Pearson was a solicitor to the City of London. And he was a real reformer, he emancipation, trying to take bribery out of juries, penal reform, universal suffrage, capital punishment. There didn't seem to be an issue in which Charles wasn't engaged. But one of his great interests was transport, solving this problem. And he had previously suggested a single train station in the centre of London near Blackfriars, but that had been turned down. And in the 1850s, in the late 1850s, he starts to release these pamphlets proposing the concept of underground railways. And you can imagine the reaction from the top-hatted, horse-drawn, manure-splattered hoi polloi of Oxford Street. He was immediately pilloried, and there is plenty of evidence to say that. But Charles kept going and actually managed to get this idea accepted. And here is a picture in 1862 of Gladstone and Fowler, an early underground engineer, on a trial run of that initial line. Unfortunately, Pearson didn't make it to see this. He died in 1862. Typical of the man, actually, that he was offered a great deal of money by the railway company but turned it down. And in fact, that money was later given to his widow. But it manifested itself in this first line. If you go down to Baker Street today, you can stand on the staircase as you enter the platform, and it looks exactly like this. The ORR have made us take the gas lights out, and we're not allowed to run steam trains anymore. But broadly, this is exactly how Baker Street looks today. And of course, we're building a cross-rail station currently at both Paddington and Farringdon. So, we're returning, really, to some of these original lines as we're building additional capacity. And following this initial success, there was a real drive towards creating this capacity to take away the challenges of Ludgate Hill. And this is just outside Bank in the 1880s. And of course, today, we've returned with our partners Dragados, and we are creating similar chaos, although everybody is wearing hard hats now. But we're renewing some of those early capacity drivers. And this continued, and here you see the growth that was created as these lines were created over a 10-year period. The district line linking these villages together to create commuter traffic, then some really dodgy property deals as the Metropolitan line is extended to Aylesbury. And then the Northern Line extension to Morden, which I'll talk about in a minute, opening to a working farm. The Piccadilly Line extension to Cockfosters, 5 of those 8 stations to Cockfosters underground. The Northern Line extension to High Barnet. And then after the Ward Central Line extension to West Ruislip. As you see, as you step through that, I've gone back to the National Office for Statistics. So in those infographics, you see, the rise in population that's being driven every time you extend these lines. So maybe Vespasian was right. Build it and they do come. Here's a picture of Morden in 1890. It's a bit out of focus. Apologies for that. But as you can see, it's just a series of fields. And here, on the site of Morden Station in 1920, a working duck farm. Now, can you imagine going to George Osborne today to say, I'd quite like to build a very expensive railway to a duck farm? But it really gives you a sense of how adventurous this exploit had become. That they were really building a new London, a new suburbia when they were extending these lines. And here in 1823, the commencement of that, in open fields as they build Morden Station. This is also 1923, but actually Morden was completed in 1926. And just 4 years later, you see this explosion of housing around Morden Station. And as you track through to the 50s, how that's built, we start to get high-rise. And then in the 2000s, I arrived, I didn't live too far away, and if you were sitting there in a car outside Morden Station, you might be able to get out of London within half an hour. Just an extraordinary expansion. And there were some very extraordinary people behind all of this. This is Albert Stanley, later to become Lord Ashfield. He's somebody who was born in the UK, but he left school at the age of 14 and joined the Detroit Tram Company. By the age of 17, he's running their timetable, and by the age of 20, he's running the company. He then takes 4 years off and goes into the Navy, and by the time he is 30, he's running a very major transport organisation in New Jersey, an organisation of 25,000 people. So, he's obviously from that an extraordinary person. But the thing he brings to this story is that he comes back to London and he forms the Underground Electric Railway Company and brings together a number of disparate businesses, some of them loss-making, to start to build this gravitational effect around the way that we treat transport in London. He's supported by Frank Pick here, who becomes the managing director of London Underground, and who's as fearsome as this photograph. He often complained that he just couldn't get people who would challenge him. He was originally a lawyer. His father was a draper and wanted to be a lawyer, so he kind of forced his son to be a lawyer, but on graduating he then went into some data department in London Transport, extraordinary, and then had an incredible rise to power. Now, if you read Nicholas Pevsner and others, they will put this man at the heart of how London looks today. He was the commissioner of much of the architectural work that we see, not just in London Underground, but in our general environs. So, and he was a busy man. So he was also tasked by the government to review all of England's ports before the war, to create the evacuation plan for London after the war, completely reviewed how the canals work in the UK. This is Charles Holden, his architect, designer of UCL, 55 Broadway, and all of those Northern Line stations. So between Pick and Holden, much of their design holds true today for London Underground. And this chap doesn't really look like an innovator, does he? But actually, I think he speaks to how London Underground innovates. This is Harry Beck. And Harry Beck was an electrical engineer who, in his spare time, developed the London Underground map. He was rejected on several occasions by the design committee. And indeed, I think they tried to make him redundant halfway through this process. And never really gave him the credit that I think he deserved for developing that map. And I think, a lot of the innovation that we talk about with London Underground comes directly from these people. Now, I've built you this little animation. So I went back to the National Statistics Office and I looked at the population of all of these boroughs. And I want you to, I thought I'd try and build an animation which showed you how the city has shaped over that 150 years. Okay, so in 1860, just before we arrived, you get this very centralised, dense population in the centre of London. Now look what happens to it. So that central density starts to be taken out, and as the transport system progresses, you get this suburban development, which allows the city, across the board to grow. And I think that's a great demonstration of what transport has done for the city. I don't know really what the people of 1850 might have thought, what Charles Pearson might have thought about what he was seeking to create, when he engaged on this journey, what all of these people thought they would end up with. It seems to me incredibly unlikely that they could have foreseen this. But there is no doubt that what they did has enabled this. And it's interesting, how should we see the city of the future? How can we push our imagination about what London will be in the future? You might say that we're dense enough, that how could we fit any more in? But actually, when you look at the centre of London, we're just a quarter of the density of Paris. Will it look like this? This is a picture from Star Wars. And I think this lacks imagination. You know, it's just a few more slightly bigger towers misshapen with a strange amoeba that's landed in the front of St. Paul's. So that's rather odd. But I think it could look fundamentally different. And actually, if we're going to design future transport systems and think strategically about what the city is going to be, then actually we need to really push our imagination quite a long way. If I'd been talking to you in 1924, I'd have been talking to you about the same things. I'd have been talking to you about incredible numbers and what a struggle it is around those numbers. I've been talking to you about how we're using engineering to solve some of those problems, even though actually it's taken us decades to try and untangle this knot at Camden Junction so that we can get some capacity through here. And I've been talking to you about how congestion threatened at every turn to overwhelm us. This picture from Colindale. And, you know, through the ages, there have always been these fiscal challenges, right back to the South Sea bubble. You know, just after we commenced London Underground, you get this very long global depression. We then get the Great Depression, you know, just as, in fact, we're trying to expand the network. So we've always faced these challenges. You know, and today, we remain dutiful and happy in our austerity. So let's turn to today and just have a think about what we're doing really in order to ensure that London survives in the immediate term. And, you know, I hope you will have experienced a significant improvement on the Victoria and Jubilee lines. We've pushed those to 33 trains per hour. And we want to push them a little bit further. We want to try and get them to 36 trains per hour. And of course that is putting enormous pressure, you know, on those stations, Victoria, Waterloo, as you well know. But you're starting to see that technology flow through. Now we've got the 4 lines upgrade, Circle, Metropolitan, Hammersmith, City and the District line. So on the Hammersmith and City and the Circle, we're pushing for 65% improvement in the capacity of those lines, and on the other two, 24 and 27. And then hot on the tail is the Northern Line upgrade, trying to get another 20%, 28% out of the Northern Line, having already achieved 20% out of Northern Line. And if you come up the Northern Line, did you notice that? You know, we got this 20% improvement, and we're back to, you know, where we started before we started that process. And then we'll get the new tube for London, which will help us push Piccadilly, Bakerloo, Central, Waterloo and City Line. In the middle of all of this comes Crossrail. In the middle of all of this comes running 24-hour tubes, a little bit later than we'd hoped. And also improvements to London Underground and DLR. But perhaps, you know, it's the major investment around the technology which is important. And often this is not new technology. It's about how we introduce existing technology, you know, into these sometimes culturally unwelcoming environments. And this is our new tube for London, which will help us initially on the Piccadilly line, much faster, you know, much more efficient. And of course, changing the passenger environment and the dwell times on the stations so that we can load people in and out of these trains faster than ever. It's all very well pushing that technology and getting faster train systems, but actually when it comes to the stations, you've got the problem that I described at Bond Street of getting people in and out. And so we're trying to move to these much longer term plans around stations. Some of these are already underway, Vauxhall and Bond Street and Tottenham Court Road and Victoria. We're about to start on Bank. But trying to get these long-term plans which flow from the capacity forecast that we're making helps us then to align the property interests around those, stakeholder interests around those, and actually plan efficiency of our asset replacement programs. And actually what it does is it also helps us to articulate the effect of varying financial background and how that leads to inefficiencies. And you may say, well, this is ridiculous to have, you know, a plan to 2050 in an environment where you don't know how much money you're going to have tomorrow when the mayor arrives. And I think my answer to that is that planning is a good starting point. the mayor has a plan to 2050. We should react to that. And I think most importantly of all, Paris have a plan to 2050. And in this year, the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, I'm damned if I'm going to be beaten by the French. I just wanted to talk to some of these schemes. So this is Tottenham Court Road. It's a busy interchange of Oxford Street and Charing Cross Road. Nobody could have anticipated 140,000 people through this station a day at the time that they built it. This shows you the complexity, the quantum of the work that we're doing there. So in yellow, on the site of the existing ticket hall, we're building a ticket hall that is 6 times the size of that existing ticket hall. In orange, new access routes down to the central line, which allows to create this more uniform density, along the platform, which get us better dwell times. In blue, new links down to the Northern Line to get more capacity at the extremities of the Northern Line platform. And then in grey, cutting across the integration of Crossrail and the Crossrail tunnels coming through at that end of the station. When Crossrail kicks in, of course, that 140, 150,000 goes to 200,000 a day. And above you see new entrances. I'm just talking about some of those technical challenges. I've just taken this cut across the model. Right in the middle, you can see a circle. And that circle is the Crossrail tunnel going through across the central line in red and under an escalated decline in blue. This the tunnel boring machine is the length of a frigate. You'll see a picture of it later. And I can tell you that the space above and below that tunnel to the 2 structures above and below is less than a metre. And we kept the central line running while we did that. And I think that that's an extraordinary achievement by that team. This is the old ticket hall. When 2 trains arrived, it couldn't cope. It just became full. So this is designed for the new ticket hall. You see the new entrance area from the pavilions. And we've opened it now. On the right-hand side there, you see the new entrance that's going to go down to Crossrail. On the left-hand side, then, the entrance area down to the Northern Line extension. And here are the 2 pavilions in front of Centre Point, which recreate the urban environments. And already, and it's a feature of these developments, you see people investing money in the area. And you see the retail values, incomparable retail values at the west end of Oxford Street, globally incomparable values in the west end of Oxford Street, sweeping up towards the eastern end. And this will change that area of London, to the point where it is unrecognisable within the next 5 to 10 years. I just wanted to mention, actually, our partners there, Taylor Woodrow and BAM, a joint venture, who have done as I've shown you, a tremendous job on that project. It's on budget. And it will be completed later this year. So you'll have half open now, you'll have the whole station by the end of 2016. So the greyest picture I can find of Bond Street. Bond Street Station is about creating a new entrance on Marylebone Lane by the Tanzanian Embassy and under an existing listed building. In yellow you see the new links down to the Jubilee line, which allow us to spread this density down the Jubilee line and then start to fully utilise, as I was talking earlier, this 36 trains per hour. And in blue, the link to Crossrail, also some new links down to the central line. A rather challenging piece of engineering where that all comes together at the crux of that hockey stick, actually, which would be the subject of a whole new lecture probably. And if you thought there was plenty of space underground, then I thought I'd bring you this along, to show you just what's in the area. So underneath here we have the existing ticket hall, and on the top right-hand side the new Marylebone Lane entrance. And you see the problem with utilities there. Those blue things going across the centre of the picture are water mains, cast iron water mains installed in the 1850s. There's a 30-inch, a 21-inch, and a 20-inch, I think, from memory. And of course, these things, if they crack, they don't leak, they explode. And having those right above a ticket hall, memories of Balham when 63 people died during the war because one of those water mains flooded the ticket hall. So, utilities are a major risk for us. And before we got anywhere near Bond Street, we had to dig up the whole of Oxford Street. And you imagine all the sensitivities there around, the retail quarter and how we were protecting people's businesses and the sort of chaos that can cause. It's a very intrusive process. So that's some of the challenges we're facing there. This is the new Marylebone Lane entrance. And again, we're on programme, and we're in good shape to finish in the spring of 2017 with the Costain Lang O'Rourke joint venture. Before I got Victoria, we used to sit around the table with some intractable problem and look at each other and go, yeah, but thank God we ain't got Victoria. It is it's a nightmare area. The ground conditions, it's made grounds and gravels. There has not been a tunnelling job at Victoria that has ended well. So, it's a phenomenally challenging scheme. You can see the extent of what we're trying to do there, because everything in that kind of olive green colour is the new upgrade. So in the top left-hand corner, you see that we're doubling the size of the southern ticket hall. In the bottom here, a new northern ticket hall, and all then the passenger routing down through the station. And on the right-hand side here, the important part of this, is getting people to this end of the Victoria line. For those of you that use Victoria, you know how people bunch up at that end. So remember, 36 trains an hour, how can we get people onto these trains and away? And that's what this is all about. This doesn't tackle, because of cash constraints, the district and circle line work that we'll have to do later, by the way. So, we're doing this job in two halves simply because we haven't got the money to do it efficiently and together. Another piece of digital engineering, this showing the jet injection grouting columns that meant that we could full-face tunnel through grout. This shows you the view over a road. So we had to sleeve all of those grout positions between the existing surfaces, take sections of the road before we could do that ground treatment. And in fact, those grout positions, those column positions are all set out directly from the model. And this was a great day, because this is the first time, this is as the tunnelling is completed, and this is the first tunnelling job that ever went well at Victoria. So it's a fantastic achievement. Here's a view of the northern ticket hall, and here are the entrances. Here's the entrance outside the Network Rail Station, again on budget, on time to finish in 2018. Bank pushes the challenge, I think, even further. Because it's absolutely at capacity. And, Bank closes 63 times a year last year, because it was just too crowded. There's an amazing operational team down there that reconfigure Bank throughout the day to try and use the station that they've got to keep it working. The solution there is to realign the southbound running track of the Northern Line so that we can create a central concourse, and then to put a new entrance in the middle of this very distended station, so that we can create vertical capacity in the middle of the station. This is the new platform on that southbound tunnel, and going for 2021 with our partners Dragados. And interestingly, actually, we tried a new procurement process with this, and this kind of speaks to how working more closely with the market can bring you really tremendous results. We produce more capacity in this country on these station projects per pound than anybody else in the world. So, we're very good in terms of getting value out of the money we spend. And yet, we went out to the market to try and market test the solution. It had so much latitude in it. Actually, you could have come back with an app. So you could have solved this solution with a pure technology solution. So we allowed the innovation to breathe. In fact, all four of the bidders came back with a much better solution. And the results of taking that winning bid and they had fundamentally changed the layout of the station, were that we got a value improvement of 50% against our own business case. And I think that's a real testament to looking again at how we work with the industry to get much better improvements. Yes, there was a 23% reduction in cost, but when all that is forgotten in 50 years' time, actually, there'll be a 90% improvement in journey time. This will be a machine that will work better for our customers in the future. And then there's Battersea, and of course this sort of speaks to how these transport schemes help us to gain access to regeneration. This is funded out of future rates as well as the 106 contribution from the developer. So whilst I think the general public have accepted that we need to undertake these big infrastructure schemes because we have to cope with the capacity problem, I think this takes it to a new point, because this says that infrastructure pays back, and there is a financial structure that allows infrastructure to pay back. So it's an important moment for us. This is the Battersea end of that job. You see the overrun tunnels under the Battersea Dogs Home, the Battersea Station and the crossover box, 9 Elms serving the American Embassy and the regeneration area, and then the connection into the Kennington Loop. The first extension of the underground for a very long time, decades. And I do love these animations because they stupendously oversimplify the process. If only it really was like this, it would be fantastic, wouldn't it? But it gives you an idea of the kind of scale of it, I suppose. There's a Geary and Foster building over the top of that. And if you're looking for the Geary building, it's the bit with no right angles in the middle. So that's helpful. As you can see, it's a major redevelopment of this area. 18,000 new homes and, a changed face of London. An incredible opportunity, therefore, for regeneration of London, and a brilliant opportunity for a selfie. This is me looking up the Battersea Power Station chimney before they took it down. Sorry about that. And then we come to Crossrail. Here we are, going in. There's that tunnelling machine we flew through at Tottenham Court Road. You see the scale of it now. And we're going in through the Paddington portal. And I think, people are going to be absolutely staggered when this opens about the scale of this. These trains are twice as long as an underground train. It brings a 10% increase in capacity, means you can get from Heathrow to Liverpool Street in 35 minutes. It changes the game in terms of unlocking housing across London. It's a staggering piece of engineering, largest engineering project, infrastructure engineering project in London. And yet, that 10% by 2026 has all gone. Even on the conservative growth figures that we are putting forward, with the biggest infrastructure project in Europe, it's sunk by 2026. And that, I think, really speaks to me of the challenge that we are facing here. And that is why, we are advocating very strongly Crossrail 2 to bring us the next 10%, a north-south route. And if you think these things are easy to get through, in my drawer at work, I have a feasibility study of the Chelsea-Hackney line from 1957. This was around at the time when the Jubilee line extension was authorised. So, this is a long game. And actually, if we're going to live up to the legacy of our forebears, we're going to have to get a bit of a wiggle on. I think actually, when I say the passenger numbers in London Underground double every 35 years, you may think of us as quite a staid organisation, but actually, at the heart of coping with this has always been innovation. Because, you never could double the size of the network within that 35-year period. And so it has always been a game of trying to get more out of the existing infrastructure. It has always been a game of increasing our passenger offer, trying to change how we dealt with our customers, and how those train systems work. And here in 1969, the world's first automatic railway. So, we talk about the digital railway today, but even back then we were adopting, very significant innovation. So, I think at the heart of this, at the heart of combating this growth, it is not just about building more. It's about how we change ourselves, how we modify ourselves in these intransigent cultures to get more out of the existing. And I just wanted to speak, I suppose, about 4 areas. So the first thing is how this existing technology changes some of the ways in which we communicate with our customers. So there are 500 of these travel apps out there at the moment. And actually, we've moved from the corporate to how we kind of outsource that process. So very early on, we released the data, our transport data, which has enabled people to develop apps which are useful to them. I think if we had developed this, if we developed these apps, we'd have one app, wouldn't we? We'd have one app. And actually, it would probably serve nobody's interests. As it is, there are 500 apps. There are 6,000 registered app developers. And actually, it's changing all the time. I personally use Citymapper, and I think actually the way in which it integrates bus services and our services across Transport for London is really superb. Second thing is, I think that digital technology is changing the way across the industry that we build. And I think actually when I think about Victoria, I wonder how we'd have done it without digital engineering. And anybody who's watching the rugby at the weekend and has been to that Aviva Stadium in Dublin, how exactly would that have been built without digital engineering? Or Birmingham New Street. So it's changing the way in which we look at these problems and helping us to understand them in a new way. But I think we've just scratched the surface, because actually the point about that engineering and that digital engineering is the way that it will allow the parties to come together to get a better solution, to collaborate with that as the fulcrum. And that's in really direct conflict. Creating those common data environments is in direct conflict with the way in which companies seek to protect their data. And so, in the next 5 years, that struggle's got to play out so that we can get the benefit of that digital engineering. And then, of course, there's the way in which we communicate. And we all use habitually email. We're just satiated with email at work. But some of the younger people entering our business today do not use email in their normal day-to-day work. I can't get hold of my 14-year-old, but by Snapchat. But it's sort of like taking people, bringing them into your business, and asking them to use Morse code to communicate with each other. And if we're going to attract the best people, then we've got to find a way of evolving in the way that we communicate with our staff and with our customers. And I think actually this presents us with as many opportunities as it does risks. Engaged businesses are successful businesses, productive, safe, and happy places. And actually, the means to communicate with our staff in a different way, means for our staff to work in a different way with each other, I think over the next 5 years will play out, and we'll see a really exciting change. Second thing I wanted to talk to is property, really. So last week, we placed 13 joint ventures with property partners. As the funding model changes for us, actually, we've got to look at how we exploit our estate. And we're looking at 50 to 75 schemes at the moment with those property partners. And this is a scheme developed at Whitechapel by my team to exploit the air rights above Whitechapel Station. You see it on the front of the Tower Hamlets vision. It will really change Whitechapel. And if we're going to change, our funding outlook, and we're going to properly exploit that estate and use those joint ventures, I think actually our ambition will be no less than becoming one of the biggest, if not the biggest developer in London. We've got lots of challenges. So how do those commercial models work with the constraints of the operational railway? But there's a real passion to overcome those. So you'll see us developing as a developer. Next thing is housing. So if you thought transport was high up the list on the mayoral agenda, you should look at the housing. London, it is calculated, needs 620,000 houses within the next 10 years. I don't think it's ever built more than 25 or 30,000 houses. In some respects, the development piece that we're playing to will create some of those. But actually, and some of the transport investment that we're making, of course, encourages people to invest around that homes piece. But we are now looking again at how we can serve those emerging mayoral agendas and how we can look at becoming not just transport, but potentially transport and housing in London. Because we can deliver, we've got land, and we're very close part of that mayoral toolkit. This just shows actually that the current transport plans unlock about 300,000 homes. The next big change I think that's on the horizon for us is how we seek better capacity. And just recently there was a prospectus published by the Secretary of State for Transport, Patrick McLaughlin, with the Mayor and Transport for London. And the intention is for us to look at the suburban network in London and to create a suburban metro. So I think that you will find, in short order, that our map could change to something like this. And the real driver for that has been what we've done with London Overground. We've substantially changed the game on London Overground. Its ridership is up 4 times. And can we get 15-minute services across 80% of this network? Because that's a great route to capacity for London. And the last thing I think that will change is the way in which we deal with the supply chain, how we integrate the supply chain across our business. And this is, I suppose, this terribly turgid, orthodox model, of London Underground dealing through a PPP. Well, we've struck those out. We've disintermediated that. We've got, relationships with a series of main contractors, then subcontractors and sub-subcontractors. This very long supply chain is rich in transaction costs, poor in communication, and the behavioural, the behaviours that it drives, I think, we can no longer afford. And everybody really that is struggling with this model, and so how can we move to a new model? And there's a lot of debate in the industry about what that might look like, but for my money, I think actually that you will see owner-operators starting to drive more direct relationships with the means of production. People who actually produce the assets and the parts of the assets that they need. And they'll need to do that because we'll need to leave off the data in order to get better operational outcomes. But of course, actually, we're an operator, so I think we will be looking to recreate some of the processes that we used at Bank so that we get that early engagement. And I'm talking about all of these relationships running over a number of schemes, over a program of schemes. So that integrator, the tier 1 relationships that we've got being repositioned as an integrator to integrate our supply chains, drive better operational outcomes, and be incentivized around those operational outcomes. And I think you'll see the nature of design change as we bring, those supply chain relationships into the design. It means us taking back much of the risk, and I think that has been at the heart of the formation of the orthodox model that we've got today. So I think you'll see that change. In many ways, I recognise these people, these faces. They don't look that different to the faces that you see today. They're people working in challenging working environments who are hewing out this new infrastructure. And I think people like to see infrastructure as pictures of tunnelling machines that I've shown you, but actually for most of the time it's mostly like this. And that skills shortage will be a very big challenge for us going forward. When it works well, and this is the team, the brilliant team from London Underground. When it works well, you can't see the divisions between these people. You can't see what organisation they come from. They overcome the contractual boundaries between them, and they act as one team with one objective. And that is what we've got to move to. And fundamentally, I think actually when I talk to this innovation, it's not really about technology or engineering. It's about behaviours, and it's about people, because it's all about trying to encourage how organisations accept new technology and new ways of doing things. And I said that we had 2 favourite pictures, and this is my other one. And of course, the meaning behind this is really self-evident, because actually, we test ourselves with this, because if we're going to live up to the legacy of our forebears, then innovation is at the heart of what we do. Change is at the heart of what we do. And sometimes actually that feels very uncomfortable. It means people taking personal risks, as Charles Pearson did, to promote these ideas if you're going to reach the top. And, most of the people watching you, aren't necessarily on your side, don't necessarily want you to succeed. You always cut across, personal interests, commercial interests, political interests. You always cut across the orthodox way of doing things. But the thing to do is to stay cheerful in that adversity and try not to look too French. So lastly, what I'd say is, if you're lucky enough to be a student at this incredible university, and you are currently being imbued with the magic powers of civil engineering, all right, to help muggles everywhere, then how can I hope for anything greater than the people who will build us a new urban environment, who will engineer us, if you like, a new civilization, who will save London, that they will look exactly like you. And if you do choose to take up this challenge, then can London be saved? Then yes, of course it can. And one last message, I think. I'm probably not a lecturer, but I am a messenger, because if Charles Pearson and Albert Stanley could say one thing to you, it would be build it, and they'll come. Thank you.
Well, from your rich applause, we already know how much you've appreciated it. A fantastic effort, Miles. We really do appreciate all the work that you've put into that. We have a question and answer period now. I'm not sure how long we've got, so I'm going to look for somebody to let me know when I ought to be asking.
You mean I went on a bit?
Thanks. But well, I'm sure there are a huge number of questions. We'd particularly like to hear from students. I know you Paviors have probably got a lot of questions to come as well. There is a roving mic somewhere, but if you can shout loud enough, then please do stand up and maybe give us your name so that we know where you are and what you're doing. The first question, please. There's a lady on the right-hand side. Please.
I'll stand up.
Please do.
Julia Elton, I'm an engineering historian, mesmerising lecture.
Thank you.
Could I just say, you talk about our great predecessors, and you talked about Charles Pearson, who's of course a solicitor. Are you an engineer?
I am, yeah.
Why aren't you in that case mentioning the great Sir John Fowler, whom you rather wrote off as an early engineer? Sir John Fowler was the man who was the engineer who made the Metropolitan line possible, and who had terrible troubles like you did, because it was cut and cover, and so that he was digging up every street.
Yeah.
He was a great engineer. He went on to be one of the engineers for the Forth Bridge, and I'd just like to say that perhaps in 150 years, somebody like you will be getting up saying, "Doesn't anybody remember Miles?"
Well, I mean, of course, you are absolutely right, and I did make a passing reference to a brilliant man. I think probably I tried to focus in this lecture on the kind of intransigence, the cultural intransigence of these organisations and the state that these people have found themselves in. So, I kind of picked my subjects quite carefully, because it was all about changing the structure. But I agree with you. As many hundreds are, he was an incredible man, and without him, none of this would of course have happened. We're digging up a lot of his stuff as I speak, actually, and it's very good.
You're not a relation, are you? No? Next question, gentleman right at the far left.
Hi, Joe Forrest, lead civil structural engineer at Bank Station.
Yes, I know, Joe.
What I will say about this new model is it's more aimed at the students. We're finding that with integration and collaboration, there's a great need for individuals to have a great breadth of skills across disciplines, so that you can understand each other. and be able to better collaborate. So I would just urge all students to just
broaden your skills, broaden your mind, and try and pick up a broader set of skills, because they will become very useful in the new age. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've built ourselves an industry which is essentially segregated, and in many ways there are specialisms that exist in those. So that lack of appreciation that I think you talked to, Joe, is perhaps most apparent when you build these collaborative structures. And actually that is when it is apparent that you need the leadership in order to reconcile those views, and everybody will have that perspective. And I think, you know, the unexpected advantage of taking that new procurement route at the bank was that we got the whole supply chain into the room at a relatively early stage. So you've got clerks working with Byrne Brothers to see how the structure could accommodate modularization of the services. So you're starting to have those conversations. And I think actually from a client's perspective, it's quite difficult to sell, but absolutely apparent that if the price for that is taking back that risk, both commercial and design, to enable people to refocus and think about the engineering to get better results and better value, then that is a risk worth taking.
Excellent. Next question, please. Again, sorry, Alexandra, you're going right to left and left to right all the time.
Hi, my name's Jay. I'm a graduate engineer at Langerock, and I was just wondering what your views were on decentralising London and sort of sending the wealth and all of our sort of power from London to the north with projects like HS2.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so let's talk to the kind of north-south thing. So I mean, actually, if you look back on our record of infrastructure spending, and you look at it as a percentage of GDP, actually, we're at position 26 or something. Actually, if you look historically, nobody has spent less as a percentage of GDP in Europe than Italy. So my answer to you, I joke about Heathrow, but actually the truth of it is we need Heathrow and Gatwick. We need the north and the south. What's missing in that equation is a political acceptance that infrastructure pays back, that we will get back what we spend, and some. So, you might look at a £43 billion economic benefit coming out of Crossrail for a £14.8 billion spend. It's about 5 to 1. Now, if that works, if we are confident as a country that works, that we will get the economic regeneration back, then actually, we should be creating infrastructure to grow this country, north and south. And I think the lesson that comes out of London of recent years is that the investment that we've put into this place has completely changed the face of London and its attractiveness across the world. It's at number 1 or number 2, depending on what survey you read today. So, I would say it's not about decentralising, and having, I suppose the political environment has created a dialogue about whether it's one or the other. My view, actually, is that we need to focus on selling the case for both. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Another question, middle, top left.
Hi, I'm Dan. I am currently a graduate engineer for Transport for London. And my question would be, actually, with things like a 35-year plan, is it truly viable to say, with a constantly shifting political and economical structure, to have things like a 35-year plan that you can almost rely on? And with this shifting kind of atmosphere, can you be sure that your answer to the question that you've posed in this lecture is actually yes?
Yeah, good question. I think that I point to history in saying that actually, because this is a matter of trajectories. Actually, when you stop investing in London, it becomes apparent very, very quickly. And I think it's at that point that the politics around it change extremely quickly. So actually this is not a matter of whether we invest today and it all gets broken forever. It's a matter of political advocacy around that trajectory. What I'm trying to say to you is that I think the projections have constantly proved themselves to be conservative, and I understand why that is. But actually, the idea behind a 35-year plan is twofold. First, it gives you a platform for explaining why not building a funding model around that has an impact, what that impact is. So it gives you this basis for the argument, for the advocacy. But I think it's deeper than that. I think if you and I are in the business of infrastructure, right? We owe it to London to plan the most efficient route for the creation of that infrastructure. So we owe it to London to try and understand what that forecast might be and how we align those property stakeholder and asset replacement interests to get the very best result, for every pound that we take off the public or our travelling customers. So that's something that we owe them. So we owe them a plan. If the plan is impacted by other things, and that's a risk piece, isn't it, around that plan, then so be it. But actually, to understand what the most efficient route through that, I think, is a useful starting point for the dialogue.
Another question? Gentleman there in the slide left.
Thanks, my name is Justus. I'll be starting my PhD at the Center for Transport Studies, this sixth floor above us, in 2 months' time. I have a question regarding shared mobility and new modes that are coming into London. How much of a role do these kind of modes play, as well as other modes like London buses, in terms of planning for large infrastructure construction work of the kind that you've just described?
Yeah, I think actually that we've been very focused on our individual modes, so the customer hasn't even got the data to enable apps to be developed to get those integrated transport solutions for them getting to work at the moment. So they haven't got this, this open access to data which would allow that community, to help that customer experience. You can go to Victoria and you can see several things coming together in Victoria. You can see a very complex road network. You can see, the bus hub around Victoria. You've got underground and you've got rail. And to be quite honest with you, if you go back to 2006, 7, 8, when that scheme was in fruition, the amount of communication around those issues was very low. And it's driven to an extent by the way in which the funding models work and the way in which we treat business cases. So business cases kind of come back up through the system, and they're very focused on the monetary return around that transport solution. I did kind of mention the business case ratio for the Jubilee Line extension in Canary Wharf. But it seems to me absolutely inexplicable that those business cases aren't built around the regenerative qualities of infrastructure. And that's part of this game in persuading the general public that infrastructure pays back. So, we saw that, didn't we, on HS2, that somehow HS2 is based on, the Birmingham-bound calculator bashing businessman and how much he will save, en route in minutes or something. Well, it's got nothing to do with that. And actually, it's driven us to writing, these business cases. And I think what I see is hope around that. I think I see, devolution, mayoral devolution and what's happened in London. The messages from the OECD finally started to get through that infrastructure is basically regenerative. And I think the business cases, the way in which we assess the relative merits of infrastructure investment will flow from that dialogue. So I think watch this space. We've come from the pure art, I think, in 2008, the non-integrated, but I think that's inexcusable now. and will be more so going forward. So I think you'll see more sophistication. You will be able to drive more sophistication in how those models are put together. So you're top dead centre of that process. An interesting question.
Any more questions? One on the right-hand side for a start, please, then I'll come back again.
Hello, Christian Cooper from London Campus.
Hello.
As it's crucial in our business that we need to show that we as civil engineers get value for taxpayers' money in order to secure funding for future much-needed projects. What do you think the legacy will be of current projects today, such as Crossrail?
Yeah. Well, I think we're getting a much better understanding of value, and so I think I think actually what we've come from is this kind of approach to infrastructure around lowest cost. Here's the model, just gives us the lowest cost, and actually what it completely misses is how much operational benefit that we're getting per pound. And we're having a much more sophisticated dialogue, aren't we, about what those drivers for value might be. So Keith gave a lecture last year about sustainability, and actually I think you see carbon emerging as actually a proxy for value. It drives better value outcomes, more operational output for every pound spent. And I think that's interesting. There's a kind of a growing clamour around these measures that will help us understand value much better. And you see the benchmarking, I think, being more sophisticated. So we can now compare, say, the amount of capacity that we're getting per pound out of Crossrail, some of the station developments with our partners internationally. And actually we're quite good at it, and we're quite good at it because we understand the modelling. So, we may think that the price of concrete is expensive in central London, but the way that we use concrete to get more, better journey time and more capacity out of these schemes in central London, we're the best in the world. And so, I think there's going to be a language emerging over the next 5 to 10 years around value rather than lowest cost. And I think that will, Crossrail and some of these schemes that we're driving at the moment will drive that. And when I talk to my colleagues, in highways or Network Rail and Heathrow and all the rest of it, they don't really talk about lowest cost anymore. That's gone, I think, as a measure. And everybody's looking for the algorithm that will get them best operating output for every pound that they spent. What's important. So, and I think as clients, that's our role is to define that value, so that we can allow the industry to come towards us to create that value.
There's a question in the middle there. Please, stand up.
Hi. Mike Wigginton from MSc Systems Engineering. I was just wondering, the construction industry is typically very silo-orientated, so everybody has their contractual arrangements. In order to produce an integrated project like some that you described today, how do you get over the contractual ideas that perhaps contractors have with regards to their responsibilities on a particular project?
I mean, I think if you look at the numbers, so across the industry, right, you see inflation from bid to outturn of between 25 to 40%. Right, it's not just London Underground. I mean, when you look at rail projects, they tend to be at the higher end of that. So the way in which we set these contracts up, immediately, and so if you ask for a lower price, you're going to get one, and we do, and that immediately sets up this, this commercial conflict. And the experience, I think, for many, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, living in the middle of these commercial conflicts without the delegation to be able to solve them is pretty dreadful. Nobody really went into the industry, starry-eyed out of institutions like this to get into jobs to deal with circumstances like that. And of course, when you have these long supply chains, it drives those behaviours. And I think, a change in that model and trying to lead the industry out of that to a place where people can make decent margins for the value that they offer, where people can refocus on engineering solutions that provide value, then that must be client-led. I don't see it any other way. And part of that is that the client will have to take back more risk to enable that. It's going to be a very unfamiliar world, I think, and it affects everybody. Clients will have to take more risk. Tier 1 contractors, will have to relate to that client and provide them with more operational value. It's not the model that they have today. We're going to be expecting more out of the people that deliver the asset and the means of production. It repositions consultants. It's uncomfortable for everybody. But I think if you ask anybody within this industry, they will say that the current model is broken. And if you want to know what that looks like, then look at the margins, of our top UK contractors in this country, and tell me that that is sustainable, because it's not. No, people aren't getting a decent return and are not being able to provide the value of their engineering, providing operational solutions. I think most of us feel that that model is dead. I think you'll see a great deal of change over the next 10 years because we can't afford it anymore.
Please.
William Kemp, retired highways engineer, I'm afraid, but in my defence, I did do a bit on Chelsea Hackney studies in the 70s. Probably everybody in the room of my age did. My question really is, you have a mature network here, Miles. What have you been able to learn from the younger networks, I think particularly of MRT in Singapore and MTR in Hong Kong? You've obviously picked up the property bit and raising money from the property. What else have you picked up from them?
Yeah, so we're particularly close to MTR, and the reason we're close is because actually the way in which they operate their systems means that there's much more resilience, there's much more turnaround. The turnaround failures is absolutely superb. They're getting very, very high values out of their infrastructure projects. So, when I say we're below the benchmarks on value for money for pounds that we spend, actually we're knocking on the door of MTR. That's our competition. They are, you can make excuses. It's a newer network and all of that. But actually, the comparing yourself, as we do through Comet, so we have an international agreement with all these metros so that we can compare benchmarking data on things like escalators and resilience and all the rest of it. Is really, really interesting. And so I think one of the things that is influenced, for instance, is moving to strategic models with our escalator fleet. So we have, I think, we've cut the capital cost of our escalators in half. We've cut the whole life cost of our escalators in half. We've halved the installation periods. And we think we've got the most reliable escalators in the world. And I think that comes directly from a conversation that we've had with MTR and comparing those benchmark figures and kind of being grown up about challenging ourselves about what's possible, changing the paradigm. So I think it's changing the culture rather than the mature network. Mature network, probably speak for quite intransigent culture, and actually, that benchmarking is helping us challenge what we do and how we do it.
Are there any more questions? There's two right at the back there. I think they'll be the last two I can take from the floor. So,
George Goldberg, PhD student here at Imperial.
George.
You described how you're building lots of new infrastructure and obviously the timeline challenges with that. And you also described how the demand is growing somewhat faster than new capacity can come on. So I was wondering, how much do you see sort of data and information technology-based solutions as being useful to close that gap between demand and new infrastructure?
There's a really interesting example. I don't know whether you've seen these bus consolidation services. So let me just take you completely off piece for a bit, right? So you're standing there as a customer, and you pick up your telephone and say, I want to travel from where I am to where I'm going. And the technology consolidates all that data and reconciles it to send a bus to you, right? You're told to go and stand 100 yards from where you currently are, and the bus will meet you on this corner. So, that the information technology has the, and those new ways of communicating have the ability to completely turn the operating model on its head. Now, I think it will. I'm not quite sure how yet, but as we move towards train systems and those signalling systems that allow us to operate trains in the service in a different way, actually maybe we can send the capability to the capacity need rather than just coping with these very fixed models that we've got at the moment. And I think that's where the technology will ultimately make a difference. But in order to get there, of course, we need train systems to enable that to happen. I mean, one of the things that I think will happen almost immediately is that so right now, we're looking at congestion data being made available. And right now, we're putting in nodes within our stations. So if you've got the congestion data, you can actually start through those apps to point people at less congested routes to work. So you can start to shape how customers use your network rather than it being a fait accompli. And if you've got beacons within these stations, then actually the partially sighted or a tourist knows exactly where they are and what the routing through those stations might be. So I think, the technology will very quickly, so I talked about that in the first stage of those kind of innovation pieces, but the technology will very quickly shape our service in the same way that apps over the last four years have changed the customer experience. The congestion data is a really good immediate route to that. I hope that's something. I can't peer right into the future, but there's some things in the immediate term that I think are likely to happen.
Gentleman in front of you.
My name's Simon Abernethy. I'm a transport historian. This might be a bit out of your zone, but I was really interested by what you were saying about property. About property,
yeah,
and developing property.
Yeah.
So is Transport for London aiming to become, one of London's largest landlords, or is it sort of developing property to sell off?
Yeah.
And how integrated is sort of these contractors being brought in and your own sort of operations in terms of refurbishing stations?
Yeah. So, I think we've been a company that has disposed of land in the past. And you see us moving to being a partner in that development process. So I point you at, say, the Earl's Court relationship with Capco is a good example of us participating in a commercial relationship. In the joint ventures are 50-50 joint ventures with those 13 property partners. They sit outside the main company. The idea is, of course, the land goes into those joint ventures. There's a piece, I think, about what happens between the clean commercial opportunity and how the operational railway, might impact on that value platform. So I think we will look at that risk in a different way. So I think we will try. I think what's likely to emerge is that we will, we will take that risk, of providing that clean commercial platform, and that there'll be a 50-50 kind of joint venture. In terms of the housing, I think it might be quite a different model, actually. So this depends on the mayor, doesn't it? But actually, if you were trying to build a model that took you to affordable housing across London, I think that you might retain and operate that property. Yeah, I think that's likely. So I think we might become that social housing provider. That's got to be a possibility, hasn't it? Yeah.
Good. I'm going to say the last question to myself. Your lecture was, can London survive? You've concluded, yes, of course it can. You've mentioned other modes of transport.
Only if you take up the challenge, though. That was my point.
Well, here we go to the question then. You've mentioned occasionally, not least through apps, other forms of transport, the buses particularly. There's overground transport like the DLR. Being a pavior, I'm always interested in the streets and trying to keep more cars off them and stopping delivery vehicles, occupying them in the middle of the day and driving them to unsocial hours at the middle of the night. When I ran a company, we introduced things called zero harm and target zero in terms of safety-free working, etc. And when I was asked the question, can we do that? I always answered, of course we can. And then the next question was, will we do that? Which is a slightly different question. Bearing in mind, you've got to get the crystal ball out a little bit, but will London survive adequately with all that you know about the funding difficulties and the will of people to come up with the imagination that you've so much implored them to do during your lecture and indeed during the answer session we've just had?
Yeah, I think London will survive because it has to, and I think actually, you know, engineering provides those solutions because it has to, and you know, I think actually it's very rare that you come across you know something that can't be solved, and so you know, I think with these brilliant people taking up the challenge, you know, history tells you that you know, our forebears have always solved those intractable problems in the past, and I have every faith that we will do in future.
Human will drive us on. Well done. I'm going to invite up now Richard Anderson to give a vote of thanks. Richard is the director of the Railway and Transport Strategy Centre, which is an applied and academic research division within the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. The RTSC operates collaborative research programmes and international benchmarking groups for public transport operation, currently serving over 80 metros, railways, urban bus and light rail operators globally. Included amongst these is the community of metros run by the RTC, and which includes London Underground. Richard graduated with a first-class honours degree in civil engineering and an MSc in transport from Imperial College in 1995. He has a unique global knowledge of metro operations and is a specialist in international benchmarking. Richard, we'd be delighted to see you up here.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Master, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for your introduction. And on behalf of Imperial College, we're very honoured to give this vote of thanks to Miles for his fantastic presentation. It was outstanding, and as I'm sure you'll agree, it was incredibly engaging, fascinating, full of history, and also, importantly, vision for the future of London's rail network. And Miles also very clearly showed and demonstrated the inextricable link between the success of a city and the mass transit system that supports it. So as is customary, I'd like to briefly summarise some of the key points that emerged from Miles' talk and the discussion. And there were three things that sort of struck me in relation also to the work that we do at the RTSC in relation to metros and the work we do with metros worldwide. The first, of course, is the incredible challenge of meeting the growing demand for the tube with extra capacity. The second is the crucial part and role of stations. We often hear about lines being upgraded, but the crucial role of stations in delivering that capacity. And lastly, TfL's strong vision for the future, particularly in the role of innovation and network development, for example, in freeing up land for future housing development. Now, taking demand first, it's perhaps some of those figures that Miles showed were actually startling, if not frightening, in terms of the demand growth that we're seeing in London. As I understand, over the last 5 years, or rather from 2009 to 2014, the demand for the tube increased by a quarter, as shown by Miles' graph. Now, those kind of levels of demand increase we don't see in Paris, we don't see in New York, and we haven't seen in Moscow. Those are the kind of increases in demand that we've seen in Hong Kong and Singapore over the last 5 years. And so therefore, we have to have this, as Miles demonstrated, this continued increase in capacity in new lines and also increasing the capacity of the existing lines. Interestingly, the 33 or 36 trains per hour that Miles mentioned that the Victoria line is due to receive in the near future is world leading. The metros of Hong Kong, Singapore, and all the major metros, new metros in China, none of them achieve 36 trains per hour. And we've seen that through modern signalling systems and through new trains like the new Tube for London, the Piccadilly line could increase its capacity by a whopping 60%. And it's this increase in efficiency that can be driven by the investment that Miles has been demonstrating that can actually improve the efficiency of the Tube, and indeed the Tube already operates globally with less subsidy for its operations than virtually any other major metro in Europe and North America. Now, secondly, on stations, we've talked about line capacity, but the station's capacity is perhaps one of the biggest civil engineering challenges that is presented with the Tube upgrade or any physical civil engineering projects in London. Constrained heavily, as Miles has shown with that diagram of Bond Street, by all the other services and utilities and buildings surrounding the stations. And it's with a great success and achievement that TfL and London Underground is achieving those projects on time and on budget, whether it be Bond Street, Tottenham Road and Victoria. It was a fascinating statistic that 53% of journey time is actually spent in stations. And yet, in London, we have stations that have actually been, most of them, designed and built over 100 years ago. And then, thirdly, Miles' presentation set out a very interesting and ambitious vision for the future, highlighting some key areas of innovation which are being led by TfL. And critically and interestingly, we're now seeing that new line development being linked to the development of London and its housing in a way that perhaps hasn't been done so in recent past, but has echoes of what happened in the 1880s with the Metropolitan line and with the Northern line, as we saw in the 1920s, releasing land and housing developments through the network extensions. We also heard from Miles about the very significant challenges in meeting the new budget crisis through, for example, innovations in procurement and getting extra value out of that supply chain. And I'd like to end by reminding us, reiterating the fact that Miles' presentation reminds us of how much the development of London's rail network has ensured that London has become a globally successful city. And the work we've done as Imperial has demonstrated how important it is that the wider economic benefits of mass transit systems are leveraged from building metros and other transport infrastructure in order to reap the most benefit from urban agglomerations. So we are now going to give a vote of thanks. I'll now present a vote of thanks on behalf of Imperial College to Miles Ashley for his fantastic and engaging lecture this evening. So please join me in thanking Miles.